I was shocked to find that these hotels and motels on the periphery of Atlanta that I had been, driving by all the time are actually extremely profitable homeless shelters. They are shelter of last resort for people like Celeste. That's where she ends up. She ends up at an extended stay hotel called Efficiency Lodge once she is pushed out of the formal housing market, out of the formal rental market. So just in Metro Atlanta alone, there are an estimated 30 to 45,000 families and individuals languishing at these hotels and motels. And these places are, the conditions are awful, just abysmal. I mean, we're talking mold, rodents, leaking ceilings, water dripping down from the ceiling onto your mattress, plumbing that doesn't work, all manner of just horrific conditions. And it's also incredibly expensive. So Maurice and Natalia, the two-parent household in the book that I mentioned earlier, they and their children end up in a studio-sized room at Extended Stay America, where in the span of 8 months, they spent $17,000 just on their room rent. And their rent down the street, this was more than double what they had been paying for a two-bedroom apartment down the road. But again, because they had been forced out of the formal housing market and they were now locked out of it, uh, they were just forced to pay whatever was being asked of them. So these hotels, it's just shocking to see how profitable they are. And they've really become not only kind of a key site in the sort of ecosystem of homelessness in America, but they're kind of a new frontier for Wall Street investors looking to capitalize on this crisis. So Blackstone and Starwood Capital, private equity firms like them, they're not only buying up vast swaths of America's rental housing, and as of a few weeks ago, I got a report from a colleague saying that private equity now owns about 10% of America's rental housing stock. I still have to fact check that figure, but that's what this report noted. So it's not an insignificant amount of housing that is now in the hands of private equity, and that housing research shows becomes increasingly insecure, precarious for those living in it because landlords like Blackstone are trying to squeeze every ounce of profit that they can from these rental properties. But what is shocking is that these firms aren't only cornering the market on the rental housing that people might be living in, they're also cornering the market on the places that people are forced into once they lose their housing. And so Blackstone and Starwood Capital spent $6 billion buying Extended Stay America, that same hotel that Maurice and Natalia are living at, where they spent $17,000 in 8 months. Blackstone and Starwood Capital bought that chain for $6 billion. So, we're familiar with the line from Baldwin about how extremely expensive it is to be poor in America. But the flip side is how extremely lucrative all this insecurity has become for some very powerful corporations and financial institutions. So I say all of that because the organizing that occurs in the book happens at this extended stay hotel at Efficiency Lodge when a group of families are evicted at gunpoint by kind of a private security firm that the hotel hires during the pandemic to force all these families out because they've lost their jobs and they don't have income coming in. So whereas normal, tenants were protected by the eviction moratorium, the residents at these hotels they had none of those tenant rights, none of those tenant protections because they weren't considered tenants. And so, in fact, they were explicitly written out of the eviction moratorium. So in the wake of this mass eviction at gunpoint, housing activists tried to organize with the residents. And, there's some hope at first that they might succeed in challenging the owners and getting back into their rooms or even trying to organize with other residents at the dozens of extended stay hotels lining the roads near Efficiency Lodge. But ultimately that attempt falters because these people, I mean, they are trying to just put food on, not on the table. They're trying to put food in the backseat of their car where they're sleeping with their children. They're trying to just get shelter. And, in the midst of such desperate circumstances, the organizing kind of falters. So, yeah, I mean, the only thing worse than being a tenant in America is not even being considered a tenant, you know, living in this kind of existing in this kind of liminal zone, this kind of limbo where you don't even have the minimal protections that tenants have. And on the flip side, the only thing worse than being homeless in America is not even being considered homeless, because those same families who were trying to organize it first, when they go to the coordinated entry point for the continuum of care, which is sort of the centralized point where homeless services are distributed or allocated, they were told, sorry, you're not homeless in the right way. You don't fit, again, going back to how homelessness is defined and counted, you don't fit the definition of homeless because you're staying in these places. So they are in this kind of permanent state of limbo, this kind of purgatory. And that is why they call it the hotel trap. That's why they refer to it as an expensive prison, because it's virtually impossible to get out of it.